Hey, this is Lee Waller, and welcome to Motion Media Design in After Effects. Today, I'm going to take a look at animating objects in 3D space. As you can see here in front of you, we have a cube that is being formed. This cube is being formed by flat 2D layers, but they are being moved around or animated in 3D space. If you're not familiar with this, this is an option in After Effects. Now, just to clarify, these will be flat 2D objects like you see in front of you, but you can animate them in 3D space. Before we jump into building something, I just want to go over a couple of things real quick. First of all, like I said, these will be 2D layers. They'll have an X and a Y axis. And so they'll be flat objects, whether it's a picture, it's a graphic, whether it's a shape layer, a solid in After Effects, a video clip. They'll be flat 2D layers, but we will be able to animate them or move them around now in 3D space. The way that we do this is on each layer in After Effects, there is a switch. It's going to look similar to this cube that you see in front of you. It's called the 3D switch. And any layer that we want to animate or move in 3D space, we'll need to click that on. Now, what that will do is, along with the 5 basic transform properties, there'll be a few more properties added. You'll notice that we will have an X, Y, and Z rotation along with orientation, and then you'll have X, Y, and Z on position and anchor point and scale. It's that Z-axis or the depth axis, the distance axis that is new and we can animate in that space. So if you're not familiar with it, the X-axis runs along the horizontal line left to right, and then the Y-axis runs vertically up and down, and then of course the Z-axis will be the distance away from us or closer to us. A couple of other options that will be available to us will be virtual cameras and lighting. These are two aspects of 3D animation that greatly improve the look of any animation, and we'll explore those. What I want to do is I want to recreate this box here. So we're going to start a new composition. I'm going to go with 1920, 1080, 24 frames, and we'll do 30 seconds and hit OK on that. And we're going to work with a shape layer. So I'm going to go up here to my shape layer tool and go to the rectangle tool. And I'm just going to double click on that. I'm going to make a few adjustments to this. So if yours is not set up like this, go ahead and click on fill. And let's do a solid color on the fill. Hit OK on that. Then we can jump into that color swatch there and just choose a color that you want to work with. Hit OK on that, and then the stroke. We'll need a stroke on each of these, and a solid color on the stroke, and then whatever color you want to go with. I'm just going to go with white on that to make it easy for right now, and we'll go with 10 pixels on that stroke. Then I'm going to jump down here into my rectangle tool and go into the rectangle path, and we're going to deconstrain those proportions, and let's change this to 500. Tab 500, and there is our first rectangle. From this point on, what I can do is just use these layers and duplicate them, but what I need to do is I'm going to open up the transform properties for this, close up contents, but I want to show you the transform properties. So the 5 basic transform properties for each layer are anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. When I click, and here is the switch, the 3D switch right there. When I click that switch, you'll notice now that on anchor point, position, and scale, we've added this Z-axis to it. And then we've also added orientation, which is a form of rotation, and then we have the X, Y, and Z rotation. So let's jump into this and start working. We will be using these transform properties to build this cube. So I'm going to make this the first layer, and what I want to do is make this the back side of it, and I'm going to go ahead and label this. Click on that layer, hit the return key, and label that back. And then what I'm going to do is, since this is 500 by 500, I need to push this away from me 250 pixels because I don't need it dead center. So what I'm going to do is on the position, if you scrub to your right, you'll push the object away from you. If you scrub to your left, you'll bring the object closer to you. So to the right is going to be a positive number, to the left is going to be a negative number. So I want to push this 250 pixels away, and we have the back side of our box. So I'm going to close that up. That's easy enough. Then I'm going to duplicate this, Control D, and label this new layer as front, and go into position, hit the P key on the keyboard. That brings up position, and instead of 250, I need to make that a negative 250, and that brings it to the front. Now, animating in 3D space, we need a little bit more from our viewer than just this flat plane here, and After Effects has added that in. Right here, we have what is called active camera, and this active camera is the view that will render out. So you have to remember to come back to this view once you're done working. But kind of working in this space right now, we have two layers in there and we can't see both of them. So what I want to do is I'm going to go to this active camera, and it gives us the option to look at this from the front, the left, top, back, right, and bottom side. And we can explore those in a minute, but for right now, what I would like to do is go to this custom view 1. And what it does is it kind of gives us a view from the upper left-hand corner, kind of like we climbed up on a ladder and we're looking down at the scene now. So you can see our back layer there, and you can see our front layer there. So this is in 3D space, and just to show you that, I'm going to go back into position on the back layer, and I'll move that farther away and then closer. So you can see that moving in that 3D space, in that Z space. So get that back to 250. And let's continue building this box. I'm going to duplicate the front layer, Control D. And of course, we have two front layers right here. I'm going to go into position for that, hitting the P key on the keyboard for position. I bring that up, and I'm going to zero that out, which brings up a point. In this 3D space, that zero plane is where all of our objects will show up in Z space. Then we can move them. So right there at that 0 point. And then what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to shift and hit R on the keyboard, and that will bring up my orientation. And then I'm going to need to rotate this 90 degrees on the Y axis. And you can see there it's rotated that layer 90 degrees, and I can bring this over now to my left side and make this the left side of the box. And to do that, I'm going to go to my position properties here. And remember that this first number is our x-axis, and that's going to move it left and right. And so I can do the math. 960 minus 250 will be 710. So I can type that in, and I have my left side of that box. And so I'm going to label that. And I can close that up. And now that we have that left side, it's going to be real easy to create that right side. I can just duplicate the left side, label that right, and then go into the position properties. And I need to move that now over 500 pixels to the right. So I can just 710 plus 500 is going to be 1210. And so now we have our right side of the box. Remember that we are in this custom view. So if I go back to the active camera, again, this is all that we see is just that front side. So I'm going to go back to the custom view 1. There's our cube. We need a top and a bottom now. So I'm going to duplicate, Control D, that right side, and let's label this bottom. And I'm going to need to go into position, using the P key on the keyboard for that, and I'm going to shift R to add rotation. And what I'll do is just get this back to 960 and then zero out my rotation right here on the Y axis. And then what I'm going to do is rotate this on the X axis 90 degrees. That flattens it out. And this time we're going to need to push this down, so that will be on the Y axis. and it's going to need to go down 250 pixels. So 540 plus 250 is 790. And so now that bottom is in there, even though we can't see it. And just like with the left and the right side, once we have created that, we can easily duplicate the bottom, label that top, and go into position and bring that up. So we're going to subtract 500 pixels from 590, and that's going to make it 290. And there is our cube. Going to jump back to the active camera, which is rather disappointing because, again, all we see is this front here. Now, there is one way in this composition that we can animate this cube. We'll introduce you to this. I'm going to add in a null object. So I'm going to go up here to Layer, New, Null Object. If you're not familiar with a null object, it is basically a controller. It's invisible. You're not going to see it. And in fact, right now, I need to turn on my handles. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-H. And there's my handles. There's that null object right there. That's all that appears, and that will not render out when you render your composition. I want this to control all of these layers right here. So it needs to be a 3D layer also. So I'm going to come over here, click the cube. It is now a 3D layer. And if I go in and look at my transform properties, you'll see all of the transform properties for that. What I'm going to do is use parenting. All 6 of these layers right here will be the child, and then this null object will be the parent. If you're not finding this parent and link column right here, you can go right in this area anywhere and right click on it and go to columns and make sure that you have parent and link selected. But what we want to do is make sure that all 6 of those are selected, and then we can easily grab this pick whip, any one of these 6 pick whips, and we will drag that to the label of the null object and drop that on there. And then you'll notice right here what it says in the parent and link column is that for each of these layers, the parent is that null right there. Now, I know mine is labeled null 2. That's because I've been working in this project and I have another null in one of the projects. Yours may be labeled null 1. But now this null will control those 6 layers, and it understands that we've created this in 3D space, and it's going to maintain that cube. So the easiest way to see this is to come down here into one of the rotations and to begin to rotate that cube. And so now you can see that we have that cube, and we can rotate that cube with this null object, which means that we can now animate this cube in 3D space. And you can see I can push it away, bring it closer, up, down, whatever I need to on this animation. And so I'm just going to quickly animate this. Going to hit reset and probably just work with some rotation real quick. I will start with the X rotation and jump in about 2 seconds and rotate that real quick. Then click for the Y rotation right there, start an animation, jump in maybe another 2 seconds, animate that. And then we will start a Z rotation right there and jump in another 2 seconds real quick and animate that. And let's see what we've got. So at this point, we've built an object using 2D layers in 3D space, and now we've also animated that object in 3D space. I'm going to demonstrate to you a second way of animating this box. To do that, I'm going to need to get rid of all of these settings for this null object. So I'm going to go into the null object, go to the transform properties right there and hit reset. That resets the box back to its original position. And now I'm just going to delete that null object. I'm left with the 6 layers of the original composition. So now I want to label comp 1. I'm going to hold down Control K. That will open up my composition settings, and I can label this 3D box. Hit OK. And now I want to create a new composition. So go up to Composition, New Composition, and we will label this Final and hit OK. And so we have that final composition open, and what I want to do is I want to nest this 3D box composition into the final composition. I'm going to go into the 3D box properties, open that up, and take a look at the transform properties. And right now we just have anchor point, position, scale, rotation, and opacity. So if I rotate this, I don't get much, okay? So what I need to do is, going to reset that. I need to click the cube on this nested composition. And it does give me all of the 3D properties with the Z-axis added to them. But if I rotate them, the box is a flat layer. There's one more switch that we need to click on this layer right here to maintain the 3D properties of this composition. To do that, we want to go right here to this switch, which is Collapse Transformations, and click that on for that layer. And now you will see that that 3D box has been expanded back out into its original 3D space. And so now when we rotate, you'll see that we have the 3D box there, and we can animate it. If you're not familiar with nesting, I do want to demonstrate this also. So that is that original composition where we built the 3D cube. If I double click on it, it opens it up. So everything is still available to me. And if I want to, I'll do this very quickly. If I want to add into this composition, I can. So I'm just going to label one of these sides very quickly. And to do that, I'm going to type in the number 1. I'm going to go into properties real quick and just type in 960 by 540, get that in the center there. And then I'm going to click the 3D cube, and that places that number 1 in 3D space. Now it has disappeared, and hopefully you understand where that number 1 is. And I'm going to just move this front layer here to the side, and you'll see that our number 1 is sitting inside of the box because it's at that 0 plane position. Undo that. And so I want to bring this number 1 out to the same position as my front layer. So I'm going to go in here to my front layer, go to position, and of course it's 960 by 540 and a negative 250. So I'll go to the position here of the number 1, 960 by 540, and I'm going to type in a negative 250. And so now my number 1 is on top of that front layer. And just to show you, I'll jump back over here to the current view real quick. You can see that number 1 sitting on top of that. Let's go back into our final composition where this is nested and take a look at that. And there it is sitting on that side. So I could label all 6 of these sides and they would maintain that label. So to continue on exploring 3D space in this composition right here, I'm going to reset the properties for this 3D box composition that I've nested. I'm going to close that up, and I'm going to add some layers into this. First thing I want to do is go up to Layer, New, and I'm going to add a solid in. And let's choose kind of a brighter color on this. Hit OK on that, hit OK. And now we want this layer to work in 3D space, so we need to click the cube. Click the cube, and now it is responding in 3D space. Again, I'm going to jump over here to this custom view 1 to show you where that solid layer is. It's intersecting the box. Now remember, this solid layer is on the Z plane, which is made up by the X and Y axis, and it's sitting at 0 on that plane. So it is intersecting that box. Now, one thing that I want to introduce you to are these 3 handles right here, which stands for our X, Y, and Z axis. So if I want to move this solid layer in 3D space, I can come to either of these 3 axes, depending on what direction I want to move them, and click on that and move the object in that direction. So I want to push this back So I'm going to come to the blue handle. They correspond X, Y, and Z with RGB, red, green, blue. And I'm going to grab that. Once you see the Z axis right there, that means that it'll constrain it to that axis. I'm going to click on it and push that back. And so you can see that now I have moved that solid back behind the box. I'm going to go ahead and push it back a little bit farther away from the box. If I come down here into my solid and I hit the P key on the keyboard, you can see there that my Z axis is around 739. And if I want to keep dialing that back using the numbers down here, I can scrub that, or again, I can use the handle here. Same with the other two handles. If I want to move this up and down or left and right, I can move that. All right, very quickly, I'm just going to jump back in here to transform properties, reset that, and then push it back. I'm going to go back to my active camera, and you'll notice that the solid is no longer filling the screen. That's because we've pushed it away from us, and the perspective is that it seems to be getting smaller, but it is actually just moving farther away in distance. We'll consider that our back wall. Now I want to add another solid in, new solid, and I'm going to go with the same settings on this and hit OK. I'm going to click the cube so that it will operate in 3D space. I'm going to open up my properties, going to go to position and then Shift R for rotation. And I want to rotate this on the X-axis. And if I rotate this 90 degrees on the X-axis, it's going to look like it disappears. It's still there, but this demonstrates that this is just a flat 2D object. It's still there, and you can see that we have our handles there. And I want to push this down and make this kind of a floor. So I'm going to grab the Z-axis right there and push that down, and there you can see that it becomes a floor. I'm going to take a look at Custom View 1, and there you can see that new solid that is acting as our floor. There's our back wall there, and let's go ahead and label those just so we know what those two are. Take a look at it from the active camera, and right now we don't have much going on. There is no indication of perspective, and this brings up another option of 3D space in After Effects, and that is lighting. So now what we want to do is add a light into this. Let's go up to Layer, New, Light. I'm going to bring these properties in real quick, and you're probably defaulted to the spotlight, and we will end up adding that real quick, but I just want to show you that After Effects has 4 types of lights that you can use. A parallel light, a spotlight, point light, and ambient light. And I'll go over that in another tutorial. But for right now, let's take a look at the spotlight. This will be much like a spotlight or flashlight, might make a little more sense to you. The options that you have on this will be color. You can change the color of it. You can change the intensity of it, how bright or how dark it is. This can go well above 100, and it can actually go into the negative, which will begin to draw light out of a scene. This cone angle, I'll explain that once we get this light in there, along with the cone feather. Right now, I don't want any fall off, so we'll select none on that, but this also can cast shadows, and there's the shadow darkness. How dark do you want that shadow to be? Along with shadow diffusion. We'll go with those settings right now and hit OK. Immediately, you see the results of this spotlight. And this object right here, this wireframe right here, is your spotlight. I'm going to jump to the Custom View 1 just so you can see this. Here's our spotlight. The light is right here. Like I mentioned just a moment ago, I'm going to double click on this. Like I mentioned just a moment ago, your cone angle is this right here, this cone right here. And right now it's at a 90 degrees, which means it is shutting this light down to 90 degrees. And if we want to open that up, it will go as far as 180 degrees, which allows more light. Or if we really want to focus this, this is where you really see the effect of it. We can bring that cone angle down. And again, there's where it really starts showing up like it is a spotlight or a flashlight. Going to open that back up and leave it. I'm going to leave it there for a second and then demonstrate this cone feather. So you can see that I can increase the feather so that this edge right here is very soft, or I can decrease that, and I'll need to bring this cone angle down. And you can see that that edge is very sharp. So that cone feather affects that. All right, so I'm going to open this up and we'll explore this light just a little bit more. You can see that I do have my X, Y, and Z handles on this, so I can move this. And yes, you can animate this light. Let me hit OK on this right here. And I'm going to drag this back a little bit so that it lights up more of our scene. You can see that if I push it closer, of course, against the back wall, it closes that light down. But if I pull it out, it's going to open that up. I can move it up or down, left or right, and we can animate this. This right here is the point of interest. So it would be like you pointing your light at something, your flashlight at something, and you can see how I can move that around. So that can be animated also. So I'm just going to kind of leave that in place right there. I'm going to jump back to active camera, and you can see how this is lighting this scene. Now, a lot of times I will do this because I want to know where the light is, but this extra cone angle here gets a little frustrating when I'm looking at it. So I'm going to jump up here to this little menu option right here and go to my view options, and I am going to turn spotlight wireframes to when selected. Hit OK. And so those wireframes go away. The light's still there, but it won't show up until I select that light. So now we have some perspective in this scene. You can see the fall off of the light, the shading of the light there. It has definitely done some work on our floor. And I'm going to go into the 3D cube. Even the 3D cube is responding to it. Going to go to rotation and rotate this around a little bit, just so we can see how this is affecting even the cube. I want to animate the cube, so I'm going to set a keyframe for the X and Y axis at the beginning of the timeline. I'm going to jump in 10 seconds right here, and I want both of them to do one full rotation during this 10 seconds. So I'm going to click on the 0 there on the 0x and type in 1 on X, and then the Y axis 1 on that, and let that render out real quick. All right, so we have that animation. I'm going to jump back real quick and take a look at it. Kind of cool there. You can see how the light is affecting that cube. And one thing I want to do is, if you're not familiar with this, I just want to trim this comp up to 10 seconds because we're just going to keep this animation within 10 seconds for right now. To do that, I'm going to set my timeline indicator right there. I'm going to hit the N key on my keyboard, and that sets the end point right there. And now I'm going to come in here and right click on that bar, and I'm going to do trim comp to work area. So now my composition is just 10 seconds long, and we can watch this rotate, and then it will repeat. That's why I did one full rotation on both of them, so that it should come right back to its 0 position and then continue rotating. All right, there's another aspect of lighting that I want to demonstrate very quickly, and that is shadows. Right now, we don't have any shadows in this scene. It takes a little bit of work to get these shadows in there, so let's take a look at that. First thing that we need to do is go into our properties for the spotlight. I'm going to double click on the spotlight, and yes, we have told it to cast shadows. But we also need to tell the object that we want to cast shadows, and that is our 3D box. If I open up the 3D box, it has just the transform properties here. There are material properties, but that will be on each individual layer. So unfortunately, we need to jump back into the 3D box composition, and we're going to need to go to each one of these layers, open up the properties for that, and go to material options here. These are added on whenever we click the 3D cube, and these have to do with lighting. You can see right here at the top, our first option is cast shadows. It's set to off. Let's click that on, and we're going to need to jump into each one of these and turn that on very quickly so that when we go back into the final composition, that cube will be casting shadows. So I've gone through all 6 of these, opened up the property, went to material options, and set cast shadows to on. So now when we jump back into our final composition, it begins to cast shadows. Now, based on the light, we can make some adjustments to this. I'm going to go back into the properties for the spotlight, and I can either double click that and open it up, or I can go into the light options here, and I'm going to go to shadow darkness, and I'm going to bring that down, say 50%. There's a little bit softer shadow, and if we want to, however you want that shadow, you can bring that diffusion up, decrease that diffusion, work with that shadow however you want it. I'm going to decrease it just a little bit more. Once you set your shadow, let's take a look at the animation now. This will definitely take a longer time to render now that we've added those shadows in. One thing that I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to decrease the quality of this, bring down the resolution, and this option right here says full. I'm at full resolution, so it's rendering every pixel it can at full resolution. I'm going to drop it to half. This will still look good, but it's going to be half the information. So it's going to speed up the render. All right, so my box is rendered out, and you can see now that we have shadows in there. The next thing that I want to do and introduce you to very quickly is the camera. I'm going to go up to Layer, New, Camera. Now, there are a ton of options on this camera. This is designed to operate just like any camera that you might get your hands on in the real world. This is considered a virtual camera, but you can see the options here. 2 things I want us to take a look at very quickly. First is the type of camera. There's a 1-node camera and a 2-node camera. I recommend when you're beginning to work with a 1-node camera, then we also have the presets. What size lens do you want on your camera? You can go with a 35. Oftentimes, After Effects defaults to this 50. So set that at a 1-node camera, 50 millimeter preset right there, and let's hit OK. You'll notice now in the composition that we have a camera added. Let's scroll that open and take a look at our properties. We do have transform properties, which will be position, orientation, and then the X, Y, and Z axis. This is how we can move this camera around and animate it. And we are going to animate this camera in just a moment. In our 10 seconds, what we'll do is just a simple push in. So we can start with position here at the beginning of the timeline, click the stopwatch for position, and then go to the end of the animation, and we can grab this Z axis and push that in. Come back to the beginning and let that render out. So there's our animation. We have added the cube into 3D space. We've added a light in, we've added shadows, and we've also added a camera in. There's a lot that you can do animating in 3D space. I hope this tutorial has introduced you to that and has been helpful. I'll continue exploring 3D space in other tutorials coming up. Thanks for watching, and for a more in-depth look at motion media design with After Effects, check out my other tutorials.